After 5 years of wiping his face, changing his clothes, and sacrificing every dream I had, I overheard my husband call me his free servant. That was the moment everything inside me snapped. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Clara. I'm in my mid-30s, and for the past 5 years my entire life has been dedicated to caring for my husband, Joel. Before his accident, Joel was strong, funny, and the type of man who filled up a room with his energy. We were married young, and I thought our future was going to be full of adventure, maybe kids, maybe traveling. But one rainy night, everything changed. Joel's car skidded off the road, and he came out of the crash paralyzed from the chest down. I didn't think twice about what I had to do. I left my job, distanced myself from friends, and poured every bit of myself into being his caregiver. I told myself it was love, that marriage meant sacrifice, that somehow my own happiness could wait. I handled everything, lifting him from bed to chair, cooking, cleaning, managing his medicines. Nights bled into mornings, and most days I was too tired to even remember who I used to be. At first, I thought Joel appreciated me, but slowly he grew bitter, snapping over little mistakes, demanding more than I could give. He refused outside help, saying only I could do things right. I told myself he was frustrated, that I had to be patient. But deep down I was drowning. The breaking point came one night when I was walking back from the kitchen. Joel didn't know I was near, and he had his phone on speaker. He was laughing with his friend Ethan, saying, "Why would I hire a nurse? Clara does everything for free. She's basically my servant." He chuckled like it was the funniest thing in the world. My body went cold. After years of breaking myself for him, all I was to him was free labor. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I lay awake replaying every moment. The nights I cried silently so he wouldn't hear, the times I begged him to show me just a little gratitude. All I could hear in my head was his laughter, mocking me. Something inside me shifted. For the first time, I thought about what life might look like if I stopped being his prisoner. That night, I knew things would never be the same again. I couldn't unhear his words, couldn't keep living as if my life didn't matter. My name is Clara, and this is the story of how I stopped being someone's servant and started being myself again. Joel was in his early 40s when the accident happened. Before that night, he carried himself with an energy that drew people in. He was confident, charming, and always seemed sure of where life was taking him. One phone call changed everything. I remember the hospital lights, the smell of disinfectant, the doctor's voice carefully explaining what paralyzed would mean. Joel's body was broken in ways that could not be fixed, and our world shifted into something I hadn't prepared for. I made the choice without hesitation. I walked away from the career I had worked so hard to build, turned down invitations from friends who couldn't understand why I disappeared, and stopped answering family members who begged me to think about my own future. All of that seemed so small compared to Joel's new reality. He needed me, and in my heart I believed staying by his side was the only path that made sense. The days blurred into routines built around his needs. I learned how to feed him when his hands failed him, how to clean his body with careful dignity, how to lift him when his weight felt heavier than my own strength, how to bathe him so he could feel human again. Every detail of his care became my responsibility. Bottles of pills lined the counter like silent reminders of what had been lost. Timers buzzed throughout the day, telling me when it was time for medicine, for stretching his stiff muscles, for changing him into clean clothes. In those first months, I kept telling myself this was love. Love meant sacrifice. Love meant pushing through the nights when my back ached so badly I wanted to collapse on the floor. Love meant biting my lip when I saw my reflection in the mirror, hollow-eyed and unrecognizable. When exhaustion wrapped itself around me like chains, I told myself it was proof I was devoted, proof I was doing the right thing. I gave every piece of myself to keep Joel's life together, convincing myself I didn't need my own. The thought of walking away never crossed my mind. I believed caring for him was the truest form of loyalty. I thought that if I held on tightly enough, somehow both of us would survive the wreck that had left more than his body broken. My body began to betray me long before my heart did. Every morning I woke with muscles stiff from lifting, my spine screaming with pain, and hands that trembled from too many sleepless nights. The mirror no longer reflected the woman I remembered. Hollow cheeks, skin pale from staying indoors, and eyes dulled from constant fatigue. I could barely recall the last time I laughed with friends or spent an evening talking with family. Invitations stopped arriving, and eventually, the silence felt like another kind of prison. Joel changed too, though not in the way I had expected. In the beginning, I thought he would see what I was giving and meet me with appreciation. Instead, bitterness took root in him. His voice carried more sharp edges than kindness. He criticized the way I moved him from the chair, sneered if his meal wasn't hot enough, scoffed when I fumbled with the straps of his brace. Small mistakes became reasons for him to lash out, as if my effort meant nothing unless it was perfect. What stung most wasn't just the words, but the way he looked at me. Like I wasn't his wife anymore, but a worker who could never do the job right. If I suggested hiring someone, even for a few hours, his answer was always the same: no. He wanted me, only me. He made it clear that anyone else stepping in wasn't acceptable. I realized it wasn't trust, it was control. There were moments when I would sit in the kitchen long after he had gone to bed, staring at my hands as if they belonged to someone else. They were raw from scrubbing, cracked from constant washing. I thought about who I used to be, a woman with plans, with dreams, with a name that meant more than caretaker. But those memories felt blurred, as if they belonged to a stranger. Still, I couldn't let myself drift too far into that sadness. Whenever doubt pressed in, I reminded myself of the vows we exchanged years ago. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. Those words felt like chains and lifelines all at once. They were the reason I stayed, even when I felt myself breaking piece by piece. I told myself love required endurance, even when my spirit whispered that what I was enduring had nothing to do with love anymore. Yet I clung to those promises, afraid that letting go would mean everything I had given was wasted. So I stayed beside him, aching, lonely, invisible, believing that my suffering was the price of loyalty. It was late, the house heavy with silence except for the hum of the refrigerator. I padded softly down the hallway with a glass of water in my hand, careful not to wake Joel. As I neared the bedroom door, a voice caught my ear. His phone was on speaker, his laughter sharp, unfamiliar. I stopped just outside the doorway, the sound rooting me in place. He was talking to Ethan, an old friend I hadn't heard mentioned in years. Joel's tone carried an ease I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time, almost playful. And then the words came, clear and cruel. Why would I need a nurse? Clara does everything for free. She's basically my servant. My grip tightened on the glass until I thought it might shatter. The room seemed to tilt, the air sucked from my chest. Servant. The word sliced through every sleepless night, every ache, every sacrifice I had made. To him, my devotion wasn't love, wasn't loyalty. It was servitude. Joel chuckled, as though reducing me to nothing more than free labor was a harmless joke. Ethan gave a low laugh in response, and Joel pressed on, adding salt to the wound. I deserve it, you know. I gave her a home, took care of her all those years. The least she can do now is look after me. I earned that. My stomach churned, while rising in my throat. I pressed myself against the wall, as if the plaster could steady me. The man on the other side of the door wasn't the one I had sworn myself to. He sounded proud, smug, boasting about my sacrifices as though they were evidence of his power rather than my love. I wanted to storm in, to scream, to make him see what those words did to me. But my legs felt heavy, locked in place. Instead, I stood there, listening to the laughter that burned hotter than any insult he had ever thrown directly at me. Each word hammered into my chest, pinning me with the truth I could no longer ignore. When the conversation wound down, I slipped back toward the kitchen, careful not to make a sound. My hands shook so badly the water sloshed over the rim of the glass. I stared at the drops splattering against the floor, wishing I could dissolve into them, disappear before the reality of what I had heard crushed me completely. That night, something inside me cracked. The vows I had been clinging to felt suddenly hollow, meaningless against the sting of his laughter. He didn't see me as a partner, or even a person. He saw me as property, someone bound to him, not by love, but by obligation he believed he had the right to demand. I crawled into bed beside him hours later, my body stiff, my mind racing. He slept peacefully, unaware that his words had split me open in ways I couldn't repair. I slipped under the covers that night without a word, my face turned toward the wall so Joel wouldn't see the storm in my eyes. He drifted off quickly, breathing slow and steady, while my mind burned like an open flame. The darkness pressed in around me, but instead of rest, it only pulled old memories to the surface. I remembered nights when tears soaked the pillow, quiet sobs muffled so he wouldn't hear. Times when I sat alone in the bathroom, gripping the sink, whispering to myself that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow never was. I thought of the dinners I placed in front of him without a thank you, the endless hours bent over tasks that went unnoticed, the years of my life slipping through my fingers without acknowledgement. Every memory piled onto the next, crushing me under their weight. The words I had overheard replayed again and again, each echo sharper than the last. A servant. That was all he believed I was. Not a partner. Not a wife. Just someone to keep him fed, cleaned, and presentable. My chest ached with the realization that my sacrifices meant nothing to him. The love I thought I was showing was invisible, swallowed by his pride. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster with my eyes as if they might offer an escape. My body felt heavy with years of service, but my spirit pulsed with something unfamiliar. Anger, grief, and something else I didn't dare name yet. For so long, I convinced myself that duty bound me to him, that leaving was unthinkable. But as I lay there in the silence, a question slid into my mind, quiet but insistent. What if I left? The thought startled me. It was as though a door had creaked open in a room I hadn't known existed. I tried to shut it, tried to remind myself of the vows, of promises made in a world that no longer existed. But the question kept returning, stronger each time. What if I walked away? What if I stopped giving myself to a man who saw me only as a tool? The idea scared me, but it also sent a jolt of energy through my veins. For the first time in years, I imagined a version of life that wasn't built around his demands. A life where I could breathe without asking permission, where my worth wasn't measured in chores. I didn't know what that world looked like, but the mere possibility flickered like a candle in the dark. Joel stirred beside me, shifting slightly in his sleep. I lay frozen, the sound of his breathing a reminder of the cage I had built around myself. But even as fear pressed in, I couldn't silence the whisper in my mind. What if I walked away? The question refused to leave me. It was no longer just a thought. It was the beginning of something I could not ignore. The morning after that sleepless night, I moved through my routines as if nothing had shifted, but inside, a seed had taken root. I spoke to Joel in the same steady tone, prepared his meals, adjusted his chair, and smiled when necessary. Yet every movement carried a hidden purpose. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing. The first step was reaching out to Mara. My sister and I hadn't spoken in years, distance growing after I abandoned everything for Joel's care. Dialing her number made my hands shake. When she answered, her voice was cautious, layered with hurt, but also softness. "Clara?" she said, as though unsure I was real. Words spilled from me, apologies, explanations, the truth I had hidden. She didn't hesitate. "Come by," she told me. "We'll figure this out." That single sentence wrapped around me like a lifeline. Next came the practical part. My nursing license had long since gathered dust, tucked away in the back of a drawer. Late at night, when Joel slept, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop glowing faintly, navigating the long process of renewal. Each form I filled out, each refresher course I quietly studied, felt like a step toward reclaiming myself. I kept the computer volume low, my ears tuned for any sound from the bedroom. Those hours became mine alone, secret windows of possibility. Money was trickier. Joel oversaw most of what little savings we had, but I found ways to scrape together bits he wouldn't notice. Change tucked away after grocery runs, small amounts of cash slipped from household purchases, even selling jewelry I no longer wore. I stored it carefully, hidden in a box buried deep in the closet. Each bill I added was more than currency. It was proof that freedom was no longer just an idea. During the day, I kept up the same appearance. I bathed him, managed his medication, adjusted his blankets when he grew cold. He never suspected that while my hands worked for him, my mind worked for me. My silence, once a symptom of defeat, had become strategy. As weeks passed, something began to shift inside me. The weight pressing on my chest loosened, little by little. I caught myself breathing deeper, standing taller, even smiling when no one was watching. For so long, every ounce of energy had gone into preserving Joel's world. Now, piece by piece, I was building my own. It wasn't just the planning that changed me. It was the realization that I could. That I was capable of reaching for more than the narrow life I had been trapped in. Each phone call with Mara, each page of notes from my coursework, each folded bill hidden away, it all whispered the same truth. I was living for myself again. And once I tasted that feeling, I knew there was no going back. I decided the moment had to feel ordinary, almost tender, so Joel wouldn't sense the storm brewing beneath my calm. That evening I set the table with care, laying out the dishes he liked best. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, seasoned the way he always preferred. Mashed potatoes sat steaming in a bowl, with butter melting into golden pools. I even pulled out the cloth napkins we rarely used, arranging everything as if we were simply a couple enjoying a quiet night together. Joel waited in his chair by the window, eyes fixed on the television. I placed his plate before him, making sure the portions were cut small enough, easy for him to manage. His expression flickered with a hint of satisfaction, rare, almost startling, but I said nothing. I poured him a glass of sweet tea and sat across from him, pretending this was just another dinner. As he started eating, I kept my voice light, almost playful, the way I used to sound years ago. "Joel," I said, setting my fork down, "do you ever think about what I gave up for us? For you?" He looked up, his brow creased, not in thought but in irritation. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, searching his face. "I mean everything. My work, my friends, the life I had. Do you ever think about it?" For a second, I thought I saw hesitation, but it dissolved instantly into a laugh, low and dismissive. He waved a hand as if brushing off a silly question. "You should be grateful I still keep you around. Most women would have left a man like me by now." The words landed heavier than the plate between us. He didn't say them with shame. He said them with pride, as if tolerating me was some gift I should be thankful for. My stomach tightened, but outwardly, I stayed still, forcing myself to swallow the silence instead of screaming. I studied him as he shoveled food into his mouth, the grease shining on his lips. In that moment, there was no doubt left, no excuse to cling to. His laughter on the phone, his cruel words at dinner, they weren't slips of the tongue. They were the truth of who he was and how he saw me. I nodded slowly, as if his response had ended the conversation, but inside, the decision was sealed. Whatever hope I had been clinging to was gone. The man across the table wasn't my partner. He was my jailer, and I had spent too many years serving a sentence I didn't deserve. I lifted my glass, pretending to drink, my face calm, my heart racing. Joel turned back to the television, satisfied, unaware that with those few words he had finally cut the last thread tying me to him. I knew then, I had to leave. The sun crept through the curtains, soft light falling across the floorboards. I moved quietly through the house, my steps deliberate, my heart steady. The bag I had packed in secret waited near the door, zipped shut, holding only what I truly needed. Every item inside was chosen carefully, stripped of sentiment, because this wasn't about carrying the past with me. It was about leaving it behind. Joel stirred as I entered the room, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the shift in my expression. I stood at the foot of his bed, not rushing, not shaking. My voice came out calm, almost too calm. "I'm leaving, Joel." For a moment he blinked, as if the words didn't register. Then a laugh broke out of him, sharp and cruel. "Leaving? Don't be ridiculous. You wouldn't last a week out there. You can't survive without me. You'll come crawling back, begging to be let in." I didn't answer right away. I let his laughter fade into the silence. Then I walked to the door, unzipped the bag just enough to show him it was real, not a bluff. I set it down with care, the sound of it hitting the floor louder than anything he'd just said. Turning to face him, I met his eyes. All the years of exhaustion, of bending myself until I broke, narrowed into one sharp sentence. "You wanted a free servant. You'll have to find another one." The room seemed to hold its breath. His smirk faltered, replaced with a flicker of disbelief. Then came the fury. His voice rose, filling the walls with threats, insults, demands. He ordered me to sit back down, to unpack, to remember my place. But I didn't move. I picked up the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked to the door. His shouting followed me down the hallway, echoing against the walls I had scrubbed countless times. My hand gripped the knob, cool against my skin, and with one final glance at the life I was abandoning, I stepped out. The air outside felt different, sharper, almost alive. His voice still carried through the doorway, ugly and desperate, but it no longer held me. Each step I took down the path, away from the house, loosened the chains that had bound me for so long. I didn't look back. Not once. Mara opened her door before I could even knock. She pulled me into her arms without a single question. As if the years we had lost had dissolved the moment she saw me standing there with that bag slung over my shoulder. Her home smelled like fresh coffee and laundry detergent, a scent that made my chest ache with comfort I hadn't realized I was starving for. That first night, I slept on her couch, the cushions worn but soft, and for the first time in so long, I wasn't waking to a list of demands. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began piecing together a new rhythm. Mara encouraged me at every step, reminding me that I had value outside of what I had endured. She helped me brush up on skills I had buried, driving me to refresher classes and cheering when the paperwork finally cleared. Soon, I was offered steady work in home healthcare. Walking into that role, I braced myself for old wounds to reopen, but instead, something unexpected happened. My patients looked at me with gratitude, not entitlement. Their thank yous were sincere, their smiles warm. For once, my efforts weren't invisible. The job gave me more than a paycheck. It gave me purpose that wasn't chained to sacrifice. I came home tired, yes, but it was a different kind of tired. The kind that comes from doing something worthwhile, something chosen. Mara noticed it too. "You look lighter," she said one evening as we sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea. And she was right. I could feel a new version of myself slowly taking shape. Reconnecting with old friends was harder. Some doors stayed closed, years of absence too much to mend. But others opened gently, offering cautious but genuine welcomes. Coffee dates turned into laughter-filled afternoons, and with each conversation, I felt pieces of my old self returning. Bit by bit, I remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be heard, to belong. The biggest change, though, was inside me. Independence, once a faint memory, bloomed again. I no longer had to ask permission to step outside, no longer had to justify how I spent an hour or a dollar. I made choices for myself, choices that reflected who I was rather than who I had been forced to become. The mirror no longer showed a stranger. It showed Clara, tired, healing, but undeniably alive. One evening, as I walked home from work, the sky streaked with fading pink and gold, I caught myself smiling for no reason at all. No mask, no performance, just a simple, unguarded smile. That was when I realized the truth. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's servant. I wasn't bound by chains of obligation. I wasn't invisible. I was Clara, and that was enough. Months passed, and the distance between my old life and my new one grew wider with each step I took forward. I was sitting in a quiet diner one afternoon, a coffee warming my hands, when a familiar voice called my name. I turned to see Ethan. Time had aged him too, lines around his eyes, shoulders heavier, but his expression carried hesitation, as though he wasn't sure if I'd even acknowledge him. We exchanged polite words, the kind strangers might share, until he leaned in, his voice lowered. "I ran into Joel," he said carefully. The name landed like a stone in my stomach, but I stayed still, waiting. "He's not doing well." Ethan explained that after I left, Joel pushed away anyone who tried to step in. Nurses came and went, none lasting more than a few weeks. His temper, his demands, his refusal to show even the smallest bit of respect drove them all out the door. Friends he once bragged to had stopped visiting altogether. Even family, distant as they'd been, gave up trying. He was alone in that house, bitter and furious at a world that no longer catered to him. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the steam blur my reflection on the surface. A part of me had expected to feel triumph, to savor the news of his downfall. But what I felt was something quieter, deeper. A release. Ethan studied me, perhaps expecting outrage or pity, but I only gave a small smile. "He got what he wanted," I said softly. "He wanted control. Now he can live with the emptiness it bought him." After Ethan left, I walked outside into the crisp air, my steps light against the pavement. The city buzzed around me, people rushing, laughing, carrying on with their lives, and I felt myself among them, no longer shadowed by his weight. Joel's world had collapsed inward, a cage of his own making, while mine had expanded into something full and alive. At night, lying in my own bed, I thought of him only briefly. I pictured the darkened house, the silence pressing against its walls, the echo of his voice bouncing back at him with no one left to hear. That image was enough. I didn't need to seek vengeance, didn't need to prove a point. His misery was built by his own hands, brick by brick, until he was sealed inside it. I whispered into the quiet, not for him but for myself. The best revenge wasn't payback. It was walking away and letting him choke on his own cruelty. And with that truth settled deep inside me, I finally slept in peace. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away, or should I have stayed and given him another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so share in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.